Palmer, we saw one practice already this week. By the time some people hear this, you will have already seen two practices this week, but we did get to hear from Will Muschamp and Glenn Schumann in our annual Hear from the Coordinators covering Georgia. We hear from the offensive and defensive coordinators, and in this case, co-defensive coordinators, at the start of fall camp, and then we hear from them again around bowl season. But we both wrote a good amount on what we heard from Muschamp and Schumann. Just, curious as to your thoughts. What were your big takeaways on actually getting to hear from Boom and getting to hear from the up-and-coming star on the Georgia defensive staff, Glenn Schumann?
Yeah, I mean, you point out the similarities and the differences between the two of them. They share that title, but they really are coming at it from two different trajectories in their careers. Muschamp coming down from having been a head coach, at South Carolina and at Florida. He's been a defensive coordinator before. He's won national championships as a defensive coordinator. Meanwhile, Schumann, rising up the coaching ranks, was a graduate assistant at Alabama, came over to Georgia with Kirby Smart, has been that inside linebackers coach, and now he's going to have a lot more control. So that stood out to me, but really just listening to the two of them, they feel very comfortable working together. And that's very important. If you're going to share that coordinator title, you have to be comfortable working together. I wrote, the old saying is, if you have two quarterbacks, you have none. Does that apply to coordinators? It doesn't sound like it, at least from what Schumann and Muschamp had to say. We'll see how things play out during the season. But as Schumann pointed out, even going back to last year, and years before, where Georgia has had one defensive coordinator, whether that was Dan Lanning or Mel Tucker, Kirby Smart is certainly involved in the defensive game planning. It is a group effort. They make it a group effort. We heard Lewis Seen refer to that group as the masterminds this past year, and that really says a lot. That there's a lot of guys involved in the defensive game planning week in and week out. It's not just the person that calls the plays on Saturdays. So that's not going to change here with co-coordinators. It's not a huge change to have multiple guys having a voice in what happens defensively. How you want to approach things, when you want to blitz, when you want to drop back in coverage, how you want to play those coverages. Personnel matters. It is not going to be a huge change in terms of what they do. And then listening to Muschamp specifically, first time that we've gotten to hear from him since he came back to Georgia, helped the team in their bowl prep before the 2021 Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, played on January 1st there, Georgia and Cincinnati that year during the COVID season. He had just been fired at South Carolina and ultimately came on staff at Georgia officially that February of 2021, before the 2021 season that Georgia went on to win the national championship. But he came in and he helped before he was officially on staff. Was in an advisory role, was hired as an analyst, but ultimately was thrust onto the field after Scott Cochran's situation and him having to step away from the team for a little while. Muschamp was ready for that, and he said, his approach to it was that in every step of the way, whether he was an analyst, whether he was an on-field coach, whether he's been a coordinator, whether he's been a head coach, he wants to do his best in the role that he has in the organization. And so that says a lot about the maturity of a guy like him. To be able to take a step back, as we talked about, Wes, I'm sure it's an interesting dynamic between Will Muschamp and Kirby Smart. Muschamp used to be his boss, used to be the one, overseeing him, and now Kirby Smart is the one overseeing Muschamp. So I'm sure that's an interesting dynamic, but, from the way that Will presented it to us, he feels very comfortable in that. And as he said, he feels like he has the best job in America because he gets to work with a coach that he's like-minded with, a staff that is very, good in its all-around efforts to work together. And ultimately, he's working with players that are incredibly fun to work with, incredibly talented, and play really good football. So, that was interesting to hear from the two of them. Obviously, they had a lot to say about specific players, and we'll get to that over the course of the next week or so here on DawgsHQ. But yeah, I think it was very important to hear. It was interesting because we didn't know who we were going to talk to. Not if it was just going to be offense or defense, but within the defense alone, it was interesting because we didn't know that we were going to talk to both Schumann and Muschamp. And the fact that we did, the fact that they said what they said about working together, really says a lot to me.
Yeah, speaking of players, I really like what Coach Boom had to say about Dan Jackson. Someone asked about Dan's impact on the team, and Muschamp cracked back. He's the second best walk-on safety to ever play at the University of Georgia. I'll let you figure out who number one was. And I'm still trying to figure out who he's talking about. Palmer, any other thoughts from practice as we wrap up for this break?
No, Georgia is now, as we're recording this on Wednesday, August 10th, Georgia's taken a little bit of a break. They've got their first day off. They went 6 days straight, and they were in full pads yesterday when we saw them on Tuesday. Physical practice, competitive practice, just the way Kirby Smart wants it. And I'm sure, as y'all are listening to this later this week, the Bulldogs are going to be taking the field at Sanford Stadium for the first time this fall for their first scrimmage of the fall. I'm sure that's going to be a very competitive atmosphere too. With so many positions up for grabs, so many roles that you've got to fill, competition is exactly what you want, and that's exactly what Georgia has.
We have the full interviews, press conferences with Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp up at the DawgsHQ YouTube channel. Palmer's written extensively about it. You definitely want to read his coverage and breakdown of the Georgia-Florida recruiting situation. And I did a little bit of translation of what Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp were really saying in their press conferences as well over at DawgsHQ. Got a $1 for 1 month deal going on as fall camp starts out, and that is running up soon. It's only a week-long deal, and I think there are just a few days left on that, so check that out. $10 for a year as well. Those prices are insane, and we are only getting busier as the season goes along here, so don't miss that. Follow Palmer Toms on Twitter for more news like he had today with the Georgia-Florida game, a lot more where that came from. And just always appreciate y'all listening and always appreciate your time, Palmer.